welcome back to Real Estate Live UK. We're on day 4 of Real Estate Live. And as I'm sure you're all aware, Real Estate Live is a week-long programme of free-to-attend virtual events that are brought to you by White Label, our partners and sponsors. And a really big thank you to all of the organisations and individuals that have contributed to the great lineup that we have taking place all this week. Now, during these 1-hour sessions, places across the UK have been showcasing investment opportunities, and interesting leading experts from the public and private sectors have all been discussing new ideas and topical issues relating to property, the built environment, and of course our communities. Now you can view the full programme of sessions taking place on our website, realestatelive.co.uk. Now the session that is about to begin this morning is our culture and community keynote. Can community-led culture revive the high street? Now, before we begin this panel, just to remind you all, I'm sure you all know that you can, and we would really like you to ask lots of questions, please, using the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. Let's make this as interactive as possible this morning. So I'm now really pleased to be able to hand over to our chair for this conversation. Welcome to Benjamin O'Connor, Director of the NLA. Benjamin, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Catherine, and good morning, everyone. As Catherine said, my name is Benjamin O'Connor. I'm a director at New London Architecture. And also, as Catherine said, we're here for the Culture and Community Keynote, where we'll be asking, can community-led culture revive the high street? The high street has faced unprecedented challenges this year, and whilst we're now open, the return to our retail centres has been slow and marred by uncertainty around the ongoing effects of the pandemic. With a huge surge in online commerce in the past year, we need to be reimagining our high streets and asking ourselves, what do our communities actually want them to be? Is it enough to bring back the retail offer, or can we create a more exciting experiential proposition that will not only support local businesses, but also our creative community of makers, artists, designers, and cultural activators? We have an excellent lineup of speakers this morning who will help us to unpack this question. As Catherine noted, please do use the Zoom Q&A button throughout, and we'll get to as many of those questions at the end. Our first speaker today is Wayne Hemingway, who is a partner at HemingwayDesign. Wayne, what role do you see the arts and events playing in the future of the high street?
Well, all we're seeing is a resetting back to how things were. And, you know, there are times all throughout society where people where aberrations are made. Society goes through aberrations in every sector, and it just happens. And society went through an aberration, probably starting in definitely starting in the 80s, when that whole concept of shop till you drop, which was kind of a really sad statement in itself, and where greed, you know, there was a government in at the time that was exceptionally greedy. Repeating some of those mistakes today as well, I must say, where it was thought that everything that life revolved around profit, and that rather than profit comes from purpose. And so we got, you know, I'm working in Basingstoke at the moment. I've just come off a discussion there where a place called Festival Place was dropped into the centre of Basingstoke. The last thing it is a festival. It's basically just an enormous shopping centre, which to an extent is failing now. And it destroyed everything that the town centre was. And if going back to when I grew up in Blackburn Town Centre, what was Blackburn Town Centre? Well, it certainly made me as a person. It made me because I was able to see David Bowie on the Aladdin Sane tour in 1971 or 72. One of those, I was either 10 or 11. And then my mum taking me to see Slade, The Sweet, all of the things. So I learnt to go to see that bands were important. By the age of 13, you didn't need ID back then. I was nightclubbing. Met my future wife in a disco in town, and we're still together. 40, I think I always get in trouble. I think it's 40 years this year. My mates, we met up. We walked to watch my beloved Blackburn Rovers. That was town set. That was what we did in the town centre. We had a potato pie, like you do if you're a Lancastrian. And then, as a side effect, and when I had hair, I would have it dyed orange and a bit like David Bowie and all that kind of stuff. So that was the well-being side of it and the health and not how healthy it was when it all started to fall out, because I dyed it so many times, but that's life. And the side effect of that was to go to the shop, which were all independents, by the way, and buy something to make yourself look good. So you did have more chance of copping off at the disco and having a snog behind the bush shelter. That was what the town centre was about. And if we can get it back towards that, then we'll be giving life back. And most importantly, human values back, because human values are not putting the hands in retailers that end up like Philip Green and making stuff offshore, not giving a flying F where they're made, who is damaged in the making process, all the environmental damage, and then everybody looking the same. On top of that, we went stupid, and now it's a time to get unstupid.
That's great. I can just see on Twitter now a snog behind the bus shelter trending on what do we need our high streets to become. I hope you're writing an autobiography, Wayne, because I would definitely read that. Thank you very much. We'll obviously come back to you in the conversation later. For those of you who joined while Wayne was speaking, please do remember you can ask any questions using the Zoom Q&A button. I'm now going to be coming to our next speaker, Sherry Dobbin, who's Managing and Cultural Director at FutureCity. Sherry, how important is collaboration with the public and private sectors, particularly cultural and creative sectors, to help high street recovery?
Well, it's quite important. I think some of what Wayne is talking about too is, more people having access to their place, to their high streets, to their towns, to their cities. Through COVID, and I think what will continue through a bit of Brexit, there's been a lot of rapid response. Creatives are the first ones to come up with ideas of things that can happen, how to fill empty spaces and how to handle them. There have been a lot of campaigns about how to invite people back into spaces. And the first thing they do is they reach out to the creative sector. Anytime we want people to feel like they can celebrate again, or they feel safe, or they want to be invited into dialogue, we look to the creatives. But then there are a lot of practical issues. There are things like business rate mitigation. There are event permits. In order to make those incredible, colorful crossings that, the RA did and also Yinka Laurie did up at Tottenham Court Road, requires a lot of different permissions between the public sector as well as the private sector and who might help to sponsor that. Our public spaces are shared between private ownership and public ownership. So just the practicality and reality of doing anything in those spaces require that kind of partnership. But also this surgence of sort of the gallery without walls, bringing the institutions or these places out into the street, particularly when numbers have been limited as to how many people can go in, has been really crucial. And it's only happening because those entities will collaborate and understand they share the same values. I'm sure Patricia is going to hit on this with the business improvement districts and what it is that businesses are looking for, whether you're a commercial leaser or a retail one. But in terms of retail, there are some changes to this. Part of what you're talking about, Wayne, there's been a huge surgence now in consumers being really wanting sustainable retail, authentic retail that comes with a narrative from people who have created it in place. And so there is a way that retail is starting to shift anyway, and the consumer is demanding that happens. We've got a wonderful preview activation that's happening at East Village that's called the Lab at E20. And right now, Lonehood is in residence in this space, and the series of events that they have dealing with sustainable fashion, swapping, creating events out of it, that dialogue, it really helps to generate a way in which community can redefine how it is that they want to live. And that's what the high streets are about. It's where we spill out of our homes, our businesses, our necessities, our essential working into a shared space, and we can really redefine it. The only way we can redefine that, though, is with proper permissions, a flexible governance, and a true invitation to people and support to realize that the systems that some of us take for granted are not known and are not obvious to the general public or to communities. And we really need to understand, how we can support that. There's been another great initiative that's been happening also off of the Olympic Park at Here East, where Beyond the Box Consultants and Poor Collective created the People's Pavilion. And their whole premise was to have young people design, not just the pavilion itself, but all of the programming. That has to happen by the local authorities and, Foundation for Future London and Here East and the businesses within it working together to allow that to happen. And so, yes, it's absolutely necessary to think about collaboration versus competition.
Great, thanks, Sherry. I've got a follow-up question for later, but very, very interesting. So our final speaker this morning is Patricia Bench, who's Chief Executive of Hammersmith Bid. Patricia, what is the role of bids in revitalising the high street and engaging the community?
Well, BIDS, good morning, everybody. BIDS, the model of a business improvement district lends itself to being very close to the businesses and self-interest alone, because they have to go back to ballot every 5 years. So it's important they know their businesses and know what their business needs. But in terms of the high street and place management in general, it's also the businesses, but there's also other people to consider. There's the local community, there's the consumers, they're the people that work there. So it's not, it has to be, you have to take on board other people's needs as well to make sure that the high street attracts the consumer and the people they want, local community, they want to be there. So it's very important that we understand the local needs of the place as well. So at the moment, Hammersmith Bid went this year, 2021, went through their ballot for the fourth term, and that from that ballot we gleaned a lot of knowledge and needs for a post-pandemic place. A place where the needs are different now to what they were before, or they've changed focus. So we know now that people, both business people, both high street and consumers, are looking for more open space, more greening, more sustainability. Those things were there before, but the shift in focus has been quite remarkable. In Hammersmith, the first thing we did once we got our successful ballot was hit the road running and start forming a public realm vision, so that we could embrace these things and we could help businesses get started on that on that sustainability, expanding the greening of the area, help them to achieve what they know they need, but they don't necessarily have the resource to do it. So we can start oiling the wheels, as Sherry just said about the various levels of governance. I mean, somewhere like Hammersmith, we've got the local authority, we've got TfL, we've got realms within TfL and realms within the local authority. So there's so many layers of governance, and that road doesn't belong to us, that road belongs to them. There's all that going on, and that is quite a quagmire. And it's on us to make it easy for the business. I mean, my mantra to the team has always been: if we make it easy for the businesses, they will do it, and they'll pick up. So if we have a sustainable things like our Parties Not Pollution project, which is zero emissions delivery service for the town centre, making it easy and help and supplying it to the businesses. It just makes it easy for them, because they want to do it, but they won't necessarily have the resource or the know-how to do it. So it's also a BID's responsibility to help them get started as well.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And please do keep your questions coming in. We've got a lot of sort of interesting statements coming through, not many actual questions. So if you want to post any questions to our speakers, please do pop them in the Q&A. I'm going to kick off with a question for our full panel, just asking which high streets do we think stand out and have made a difference, and which do you think might be struggling? Now, Wayne, you mentioned your high street growing up. Any thoughts on any high streets that you think are doing particularly well or particularly badly at the moment and might need support?
Well, there are plenty of I'm going to just stick with the positive stuff, really. There are plenty of high streets that are doing. I think number one, we should maybe stop using the word high street and start to just talk about town centres, because high street, it feels like it invokes BHS and all those dinosaurs that are thankfully gone now. where I think town centre, you don't think about culture in high street, you think about shopping in the word high street, whereas town centre, you start to think about culture. So maybe we should just dispense with that word. And it's hard because some streets are called high street in towns and they're physically called that. But if we concentrate on some that are doing, some town centres that are doing really, really well, and some of them are like 7% up on pre-pandemic. So ones that I particularly like, if we start small and we look at a place like Todmorden, which I know very, very well because it was it's very close to where myself and my wife are from. And certainly when we grew up, it was a place that you just there was nothing to really draw you to it. And what they've done very simply, I don't know when it started, 10 or 11 years ago, this thing called, and it was community like it should be, it came from bottom up. If nobody's heard of it, I think most people will have done, Incredible Edible at Todmorden, where one woman really had the idea to plant every single place, every single bit of grass, every roundabout, every window box with something that you could eat. And it spread. The community got behind it. And now, without a doubt, it is the gastronomic centre of Todmorden, the gastronomic centre of that part of the Lancashire, Yorkshire. It's just beggars belief that it could happen, but it happened. And it's not going anywhere. It's not going south from there now. It's upwards. In a scale up from that, look at Hebdon Bridge. Again, I know that place very, very well, and for it to become as desirable as it has is a testament to people and diversity, and the fact that it became the town. And bear in mind, this is Yorkshire, and I'm a Lancastrian, so I'm going to be a bit disparaging to Yorkshire folk. But this is the town that has become probably the LGBT capital of small towns. Obviously Manchester and London do it on a bigger scale, and has welcomed that diversity as well as other forms of diversity, and made a virtue out of it, and it's become this vibrant, exciting, modern old market town, and there are so many examples like this. There are, on a more mass market, a larger scale. Look at Shrewsbury. Shrewsbury is just doing phenomenally well as the regional town. But you go there, and it's just independent spirit. It just hits you and hits you. So the clues are there. It's not everything isn't doom and gloom. You've just got to do things differently and fit the society, the direction of travel of society that everybody on this panel has been talking about.
Great, thank you, Wayne. Sherry, same question.
I again, maybe not high street, but areas or such. I mean, one area I've been rather impressed with is how Hackney has kind of taken advantage of this to really put forward greening initiatives, more pedestrian areas, making open spaces where people actually can gather, play. Have been creating events more. The new public art piece by Veronica Ryan, that celebrates the Windrush generation, is really wonderful. And there's something about permanent public art that makes a statement and a commitment that says, I care about you. I've invested in something, that's quite permanent. And also there have been a lot more independents that have been able to pop up in different shops. And there's been an ability also for the lease terms, to shrink. And I think that's another thing. If there's more flexibility and we embrace that pop-up is not just an idea, it's a little bit about the way that we look at new trends, has been very good. And like I say, even within a development like East Village, being able to put up an experimental lab that is looking at, 6 different partners who are dealing with sustainable fashion right in the area that's near, Westfield Shopping. It's thinking about how you create an ecosystem also that allows independents and larger chains to coexist, and how we look for a series of different opportunities, that are available. But It's been some of those approaches within those smaller cities, I guess, within the city that have been very interesting to see how the London boroughs have been responding to it. And places like Peckham and Brixton have only become, more populated in a sense, more active. And so it does show you what the actual consumers are interested in and how the retailers need to pay attention to that to start adapting to what our high streets can be.
Thank you, Sherry. I'll come over to you, Patricia. I'm sure you're a little bit biased on Hammersmith there, but maybe you can say a little bit Hammersmith, and then if there's anywhere else you look to that you think are doing particularly well.
Well, I am biased, obviously, but I think people say they really want independence, and I believe them. I completely buy into that people do prefer, if they can, to use independent stores and have that unique experience. The fact of the matter is, though, that mostly we can't, because mostly they're not there. So we have this meanwhile time that we have to do something while things evolve. And I think it's really important. So some of the things we've done in Hammersmith, for example, pop-up parks, so to give people some more space, and they want to develop that even further. Events. We put on a big screen, what we have been doing for years and years, and it brought it back this summer. And we use we've developed something called a privilege card, which is to give local people working and living there special offers and events to come to. And we did some film nights over the summer, and the appetite and this was just that, in fact, one of them was before July the 19th, when everything opened up a lot more. And the appetite to come to a socially distanced deck chair square in the centre of Hammersmith was astounding. So the appetite is there for people to want to meet, to want to do something together, to have those experiences, not necessarily to shop, whether it's independent or a national retailer. It's to come together. So that need to come together hasn't gone away. In fact, if anything, in this post-pandemic period, we are seeing a real appetite to do it more so, but the shift in focus is there. But hospitality is still really, really popular. People still want to meet, to eat and drink together. They may want to do it outside a bit more than they did before, and that looks great because it livens up the high street by bringing more of what was inside outside. Is already making a difference to a lot of the local high streets. I mean, Hammersmith is a main high street. But what has been happening certainly in London generally, where I live, for example, my local butcher around the corner has had a bumper year. He's had the best 2 years he's ever had through the pandemic. And he was a successful business already, but it's just been extraordinary. Same with the bakery. So those smaller local high streets, if that makes sense, or local shopping parades, I suppose, would be a more accurate description. They've really come into their own. Main high streets, though, there's still a need for people to come from, certainly in a place like London, where people meet from various parts of town. You still need a focal point. We just need to make it more we know what people want now. Let's drive and make that happen.
Great, thank you, Patricia. We've got some really good questions coming through, but before we get to those, I did just want to ask, obviously we're at Real Estate Live, and I wanted to ask, what do we think the role of real estate specifically is in sort of supporting and encouraging these kind of cultural initiatives and this shift in town centres? Maybe I'll switch things up and come to Sherry first.
One of the things that has become quite popular is the idea also of a collaborative high street or cultural co-location, and possibly looking at how space is shared and how culture or creative initiatives can also be part of or shared within that retail environment. And so there needs to be a little bit of flexibility, perhaps in those leases about how that can happen. But it is one of the ways that it's happening. A lot of the purpose-driven brands are also looking at events that are, of course, very interested in the community. And so it's okay to sell things and to sell things responsibly and to share the story behind how they're created. So again, I think it's leaving space for how brands are shifting and changing and how that is integral to how they're used. And one thing I did want to bring up is there's something called Respace Projects. And this is really important if you go and check them out. Their whole idea is about reusing space for social good. And they've got a very considered system and a way of working that really helps both the leasers and the local authorities and social initiatives to understand how to share spaces. And they've even been working on developing different apps to make it easy and simple and be able to do it. And they have a very successful project that happened in Peterborough. So it's not just based in London, these concepts. But again, pay attention to what retail is starting to do and where it's moving. And it is more consumer and people focused. And so you can just naturally find that there is an incredible synergy between the trends within the culture sector and the creatives, as well as what the retailers are looking for and how you form those genuine relationships and partnerships.
Thank you, Sherry. Wayne, role of real estate.
Yes, I think you have to look at real estate in two ways, really. One, when you think of real estate, we think of big developers, but also increasingly towns, councils can buy real estate with town fund money, and when the levelling up money starts to, although I bloody well hate that term, and the way that it's banded around, just as a soundbite by a government that's very good at soundbites but very bad at governing. If you look first of all at some towns that are taking the bull by the horns and doing it themselves, I think the first one that I was close to and started to do the right thing was probably Margate, and obviously it's paid off massively. So when we first started working in Margate in 2009, I remember seeing that the old town of Margate was pretty well empty. Anybody that's been there will know that the old town of Margate is absolutely flying, and you can't get real estate, that American term, for love nor money. But at the time, it was pretty empty, and the council were helping creative businesses colonize that part of town. There was posters up saying this unit could be yours. They'd bought units and all of that, and in a way, they understood very early that they had to create town centre resurgence from an independent point of view. And still to this day, if you go to Margate, the split between the old town, which it isn't that long ago, I'm talking about 12 years ago when it was empty, and the split between that and the independent spirit that town has got, compared to the old high street, which is still decimated, but it actually doesn't really matter, because there's been a correct shift in the axis of importance in the town. So nobody talks about the crappy high street of Margate. They talk about the independent spirit and all of the other the culture, from the Turner Contemporary to Dreamland to all of that kind of stuff. And then if you look at another town that my hometown, Blackburn, and they grab the bull by the horns. It's worth people looking. I haven't got time to talk about it on this, or it'll be all me talking. If you look at Blackburn is Open, which they did in about, I don't know, maybe I reckon about 2010, and then what has come out of that? The National Festival of Making, which is one of the biggest town centre festivals in the UK, 55,000 people rock up to that free festival, and the town has become, and what it has done is since when that festival started, there were no bars open after 5:30 in a town of 150,000 people, zero. And now there are 11, all started by young people. Lots of them have left the college there and opened bars and things. And so, but it's not a developer that's done that. It's a town, and so that's my first two examples. And then when you look at developers, look how good King's Cross is when you do something really, really well. And obviously, some people have say things about how expensive the apartments are and all of that. But the fact is that the first choice for me to take the grandkids and to meet all walks of life from around the borough of Camden who've gone there for free to play in those fountains and to sit on those steps. You don't have to buy an expensive meal at Caravan or queue up at Dishoom or something like that. You can enjoy King's Cross in all its beauty and all its history and all its modernism. And similarly, the Greenwich Peninsula outside the O2, you know, what's happening around that area with things like the Urban Village Fete and Sample and all of that. So developers can make a difference, but they've got to realise that it's not just in the balance is, yes, if they do it right, they probably will attract the Googles like King's Cross have done and the Facebooks and sell £2 million flats. But they've also got to be generous at the same time, or else they're going to get pulled to pieces for that from a brand perspective.
Thanks, Wayne. It's a shameless plug. We did open a Cold Drops Yard pop-up for NLA right at the back there. So another free thing to do, go and have a look at our exhibition and model over there. Patricia, role of real estate.
Role of real estate. Well, I think the big advantage of the role of real estate is its inward investment, and it's then beholding to the area and the place and the local management, whether it's a bid, whether it's local authority, is how to use that inward investment and make sure it's used wisely and it's used for the people that the projects that I've mentioned earlier they're all covered. Local artists are covered and local creatives are also supported. This is coming. There's a development at the moment in Hammersmith, which is very behind time, but that's going to have a place for a community place within the development. Now, let's wait to see what that really looks like in reality and for local artists. But something the bid is very, very passionate about is supporting that local artists and local creativity as startup businesses in themselves. And so we're very keen to see that happen, and we're looking at ways again, meantime, while things are being developed, meantime space, new places for markets and things like that. But in terms of of developers themselves, we need to. I agree with Wayne, we need to really, really keep our eye, make sure that they're not doing things selfishly, make sure we everybody gains from it, and it otherwise it can turn, as you say, it can turn against them. So they have to take on board the 2021 view from the community now of how things are and what we want and what we need, along with everybody else.
Thank you, Patricia. So we've spoken a bit about kind of specific examples of town centres and high streets a little bit. Now I'd like to talk about how we can kind of get some of this stuff done and specific examples of things we can do. And I'm going to go to one of the audience questions. We've touched on it. I think Wayne and Sherry did touch on it slightly, but what do the panel think are the best options to experiment with local areas where empty shops can be repurposed with the council's help, flexibility, short term, to allow ideas to be tried without landlords avoiding it to find a long-term tenant? Have we got any thoughts on these disused office spaces and how we might use them? Maybe Sherry.
Yeah, we've actually started a part of our work called Preview. And the idea is how we can preview ideas. And so rather than just inviting in ideas that fill time and are really quick, it's also thinking about how we can preview concepts that we want to develop into, longer, more sustainable approaches. So I've mentioned East Village, but even with the development in an older building, the work that we've done at 72 Upper Ground, we invited in during the pandemic when certain cultural initiatives were really squeezed. We invited young creators and iconic steps and Black cultural archives into the space. And part of what we did is we said, we can give you more of this space. We'd love to be able to have a conversation with you, though, continue conversation over 6 to 9 months. All of those ideas, their feedback, and then working on the design with the architects and the landscape architects for the future has actually helped to inform what's going to happen from a cultural perspective, but also how it intersects with the needs of skills and training for residents of Lambeth, and also how it has a relationship to the commercial companies that will probably come in and lease the building, as well as the cultural institutions that are all along the South Bank. So, for example, what I'm saying is that the short and the quick doesn't always have to be just something that you would go in and dispense with later. It's really an opportunity for us to challenge these notions of what can't work and see if they can work, to be in dialogue through the process, learn from it, and understand whether you might even expand that time right then, or it helps to inform how you're going to build this for the longer term. One of the things that has been so amazing to me is the inverse that's happened as a result of this pandemic. So everything that we used to do that was spontaneous, we now have to plan for. And what we used to plan for now has to be spontaneous, right? So I used to drop into a gallery and I didn't, but now I have to book a ticket. I used to try and plan a long-term vacation, a holiday, and now you can't. You have to wait and find out what's going on. I think this is also happening actually with retail and creatives. We very often think that creative and cultural sector, we should just think about as pop-up. And retail is something that is tried, true, long-term. If you look at what's going on, a lot of retail now wants to be pop-up or shape-shifting. What you can do is actually use some of those smaller spaces to invest in the long-term for cultural presence. Because what will happen is, a creative industry will stay there and will evolve and change, but will stay there. And the retail may come and go, but it will keep a very stable sense of place as far as a presence. But the work that creatives do always responds to the contemporary trends. So maybe what we need to be thinking is that culture is more of the sure bet on the long term, and retail is something that's going to continue to flex.
Very interesting. Thank you, Sherry. Wayne, obviously the original question was specifically around vacant spaces, but I think Sherry opened up some really interesting questions of broader kind of interventions and things we can do. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think kind of hopefully expanding on what the question was, we've got to look at the nuances of it, because we're working quite a lot with elected members of councils up and down the country at the moment, and there seems to be a very strong narrative everywhere. This is every town, that we need to get more people that to solve one of the issues of town centres blight, which often they call it. I don't like that word. I think it's evolution. Is that we need more people living close to the shops. That's the narrative, not my narrative. But more people living in our town centres, which is correct in a way. Obviously, if it's sustainable to have more people living in a town centre for obvious reasons. You're not building on greenfield sites and doing all that stuff that Wimpy and the lot do. You're not you're close to public transport, and giving people the opportunity to be social together benefits businesses. But that's when the nuances come into it, because not all people are the same, and just saying that you need more people is just that thing about we need more people living in our town centre. Therefore, let's get them living there. Now, that is a recipe for absolute disaster, and is proving that way. That is a recipe for permitted development rights, which I'm sure most people on here understand what that is and what it has done for many places. It means that overriding the fact of quality and people's quality of life, and also the kind of people that you want to attract, the balance of people that you want to attract, you end up with permitted development rights that ends up often with not the mix of people that will benefit the town centre, and also very unhappy homes to live in. So that's, if we just stick with that one thing, I could go on with so many things that elected members are responding to. And it's back to that soundbite culture of where somebody says something and then people, without understanding the nuances and the issues about doing things right, they all jump on the bandwagon, and we end up with a worse situation than we had before and another mess to unpick. I said I was brought up in Blackburn, but I was born in Morecambe. So I had a dual life of living part of my young life in Morecambe and then moving just before becoming a teenager to Blackburn. So I know coastal communities very, very well, and families families still live there and I visit there. So Morecambe is an example of turning a corner now. But like many coastal towns, including Margate that we talked about, we had this very same thing happening where we shifted to travelling abroad. Bed and breakfasts became available. Therefore, we turned them into HMSOs, homes of multiple single occupation, and then we have to unpick that and the money it costs to unpick that. 2 and 3 decades later, we're doing exactly the same thing in many town centres at the moment, and it's scary.
Great, thank you very much, Wayne. Patricia, thoughts on the sort of vacant retail spaces, anything that's happening at Hammersmith you can highlight?
Well, funnily enough, we did a very, very popular programme, a project called Made in H&F. And how it happened is that there was an empty unit in a local shopping centre. So, and the management was on our board. I mean, that's the other thing about BIDS. They have the board of local business people. So we had this very, very good connection. And to cut a long story short, the shopping centre donated this unit, so there was no cost involved to us. Obviously, they had to pay the rates and so on. So they donated the unit. We partnered with the council, who had some startup funding, and we brought in dozens and dozens and dozens of local artists and creatives. We could afford, because of the funding from the council, we could afford to put a full-time manager in there. So we created, in fact, we had a full-time and a part-time worker there. So we created some actual employment as well with the project, and the sales of the pieces that the creatives and the artists brought in. A percentage, they got to 80% of the sale, and something went back into the unit to try and maintain the sustainability of it. And that went on until a redevelopment, and that redevelopment is the one I was referring to earlier, which happened just as the pandemic broke in spring 2020, and it's still being the redevelopments there now. So using empty units, be they retail units or anything else, for alternative use, it is starting to happen, and it's great. It's great. It really vitalised that area of the mall when we did it. We've also seen galleries pop up in various places, and to lesser, because if they're in an office block and the gallery's on the 3rd floor or whatever. So that isn't so successful, because the accessibility becomes a problem. But to rethink a place and try and bring it into the community, we also did things like events in that unit as well, and provide training for. I mean, a lot of artists are very good artists, but not so knowledgeable on the business side of things. So to financial workshops and things like that, we fixed up, and the take of that was not huge, but at least it was there, and some of them did take it up. So all that other skill set, the training that goes behind treating them like a small business, because they don't always. What we found is that a lot of the local artists weren't treating themselves as a business. They were treating it as a hobby, and do you like it, and is it any good? That and bringing them up and their confidence. It's great. Look, you've sold all this. It was very rewarding, and it's something we definitely want to revisit and bring back. In fact, we're looking at ways to do that right now.
Great, thank you, Patricia. I'm just thinking at the time, and there's a lot of questions that I want to get through. We haven't quite tackled the piece on actually community-led initiatives. We've sort of touched on it a little bit with a few examples. I am going to come back to that after we have a discussion around one of the questions here, which has been there for a while, that I'm very interested in, which is, we talk about these interventions, whether they're in shops, whether they're in the public realm, whether they're greater master plans. There is this issue of, like, how do we measure their value? How do we know what's good? and actually who is saying what's good and who's responsible for that strategy. We had a think tank at NLA recently and a webinar a couple of weeks ago that actually we have lots of public sector and private sector, and there appears to be a little bit of a gap, and that may be where a bid or something like NLA or FutureCity can fill, which is it's that bringing people together piece. But there doesn't really seem to be a standard around what do we mean by good. And so actually going back to the question was, are there any mechanisms for recognizing accepting the value of elements that have no measurable value? So how do we recognize the value? What does good look like? And then sort of aside from that, who's responsible? So maybe Sherry, if I can come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you mean is no value. I think what the subtext is no economic value. And one of the things, yes. one of the things we assume is that you only measure based on economic value. And I'm not dismissing the importance of economic value, but some of it is not like a retail transaction and you put the money and you immediately get it back. Sometimes it's an investment. And I just gave a talk in Amsterdam the other night, specifically about this idea of culture as an indirect revenue, how what it actually does, what it supplies, enhances the other businesses around it and the value of the place around it. And so in that way, it can be an indirect revenue, or it might provide something that you normally would have paid for through, say, marketing activations or something like that. So it has an indirect revenue to you, i.e. it was an expense you were going to spend to do something, but you decide to spend it that way. And you got the benefit of what you had originally intended, as well as being able to deliver something that connected people or gave a vitality and an actual distinctiveness to the area. So I think if we consider it an indirect revenue, that will take care of the economic value. But Creative Land Trust just did a research paper where they were able to actually establish that there was a 4.4% increase in the value of an area if there were creative workspaces. So that measurement has begun to take place. There are several different social value impact measurement systems now that are out there. So you can look at that. But really, to simplify it, I mean, look, no matter how simple it is, a strategy that aligns people on shared objectives, finding the place where you have the largest concentration of shared objective means you're more invested, you're willing to risk, and you're willing to take a look. As soon as you set out what you're going to do, be honest about what it is you're trying to achieve. I want more footfall. I want to change the perception. I want more people to be invested. I want to attract new business. Whatever it is, you can't get all of them. Choose what's most important and then measure that. So that's going to be the most effective, immediate way. But what that requires is everybody to be really honest and make a choice about what is the most important thing you're trying to shift, note that benchmark, and then measure against that benchmark.
Very interesting. Thank you, Sherry. I had a discussion recently, which was looking at some really obvious examples where interventions have been made where you could track that sort of economic value. So if you think of Canary Wharf with their Winter Lights Festival, you took an area that was not busy at the weekend and then you have 100,000 footfall going through. That clearly has a tangible value, economic value to those businesses in the area. But when you're thinking about things like public realm, a tree-lined street versus a non-tree-lined street, it's very difficult to quantify, which is something that really fascinates me.
But also just really quickly, social media analytics, let's just be honest. If you want to measure a change in perception, you can look at how people actually respond, what they post, how many people repost it.
Absolutely.
The way we look at how somebody knows or thinks about a city is we Google the city name and we see what images come up. And it's usually a cultural institution, a cultural intervention, or design-led. So, we have that ability now to look at those kind of, quote, intangibles.
Very good point. Thanks, Sherry. Wayne. Oh, you're just on mute, Wayne. Bound to be one.
I'm not on mute anymore. There was the office dogs were barking, so I had to go off. Always an and I also left my homework on the bus. We had a body, remembering, in CABE that would have right now taken leadership on all of this and would have been doing the metrics on on what was working and what wasn't working. And whilst it was funded, initially by John Prescott and that team, it acted independently, and it would have been there giving real analysis of what was working and what wasn't working, and it was nationally respected, and most people were glad that it was around. Today we don't have that. Obviously, it's kind of was shrunk to nothing. There is a bit of it left in the Design Council, but it hasn't got teeth. It had all its teeth taken away from it, and we've got Centre for Cities, which is measuring all of this and is absolutely brilliant. But again, it doesn't seem to have the ear of government, and doesn't seem to sit on the top table in the way that CAVE did, and was able to influence policy. So until government puts its money where its mouth is and has arm's length, more than arm's length, independent bodies that can actually criticize it, and it listens, and can actually measure things and say, actually, what the soundbite that you're making can be debunked because this, and this, then we're going to carry on in this pretty bad situation we're in, where it's all hot air at the moment. There's too much hot air going around.
Thanks, Wayne. Patricia, I'll come to you next on the sort of measurement of value. Who's responsible?
Well, I think we've established from this conversation already that finding an actual tangible measure isn't an easy thing. But as a bid, what we do is when we go to ballots and things is talk to our businesses, and we use that as a kind of measure. And one of the measures that we haven't spoken about is people who work there, people with their well-being, their mental health. This is an area that is talked about more than ever now. It's always been talked. Well-being's been talked about for a while. Well-being and mental health hasn't been talked about so much, and that's another measure of how good a place is. If you've got somewhere where people want to go, they feel comfortable, they feel safe. That women can walk in the dark and be safe there at night, which isn't always the case anymore. All those things, if we use those as our own measures, we can introduce measures without having an official number, because we all know if it feels right or wrong. But it would be very, very useful to have an academic measure, if you like, so that we can all talk on the same page. But we also know by talking to each other, talking as a community, whether it's a business community or local community, or hopefully both combined, we all know what it is that the majority of people would like to see. And that's the best measure of all, the community measure, for my money. And we have to make sure we keep on talking to each other.
Thanks, Patricia. I'm going to try and cram 2 questions in before the end. We've got 8 minutes. So I'm going to pick up on one of the questions from the audience and expand it a little bit. So the question was, do you think that there is still a role for the old department stores post-pandemic, perhaps housing retailers who can no longer afford the overheads of occupying a premises outright, particularly across multiple towns? And could a shift like this open up the high street to more independent shops and cultural uses? I'm going to tag on to the end of that, which is a question I was going to ask anyway, which is, what can retailers do? So it kind of fits into that. Maybe I'll come to Wayne first on this one.
Well, there's always uses. So we going back to, and there won't be that many people on this Zoom that will remember it. But going back to how we started out in 1980 on Kensington High Street with Kensington Market, which was a 4-story repurposed, big building that became probably the best place for startup retailers that's ever existed in Britain, certainly in London. And what came out of it, the names that came out of it, I could reel off both from pop culture and from fashion. So that we know that's tried and tested, and it's become increasingly difficult because of 2 things to recreate that. One, small businesses, a lot of startups are quite happy trading off the internet. and you become used to it. And secondly, too many of the buildings are still owned by pension funds who are still, it's starting to happen, but are not writing down their assets to the level where you could create another Kensington Market or the like of. So yes, I mean, I'll keep this short because I've spoken a lot, but everything can be reused for something else. It's just making sure that intelligence and that things are thought through, and it's not just knee-jerk, and it's not just like, obviously we keep hearing about Altrincham Market, and Nick Johnson's done an amazing job with and what Altrincham Market has done to revitalise the independent spirit of Altrincham is phenomenal and should be applauded. But everywhere quotes Altrincham Market, and everybody says they can do an Altrincham Market and they can turn Debenhams into an Altrincham Market and such. But Altrincham Market was a beautiful building in the perfect situation with a spill out area around it with a south-facing aspect. Of course it was going to work. And you can't repeat this thing of, that works, therefore we'll do it in a Debenhams. Everything has got to be bespoke and thought through and right for the town, right for the community.
Thanks, Wayne. Sherry.
I've got 3 examples in 3 different countries. One, Spitalfields Market, and what that market was able to do and how it had an impact on the rest of the retail around it. 2, in Atlanta, Georgia, there's something called Ponce City Market. Amazing, huge industrial building that then was completely filled with expanding the notion of concept store and redeveloping like what a mall experience could be. And the third one that we probably all know about in this sector is Bikini Berlin. And so Wayne, you want to talk about like unsexy architecture that has to be challenged to turn into, independence. Bikini Berlin has been a really great example of that. And if you go there, then you know that. And it's also something that the city has used as one of their biggest tourist marketing attractions.
Great, thanks, Sherry. Patricia.
I think the things like the Altrincham Market are great. What I think what needs to be also considered is just where these places are. If something works in one place, it won't necessarily work everywhere else. Altrincham, for example, the hinterland round there, it's one of the wealthiest in the country. So they go. It's great for the startup businesses, but it's also got consumers on its doorstep with expendable income, and that isn't always the case in other places. So I think we have to look at places, things place by place, and unit by unit. It isn't one size fits all, but we can look at other places and learn and pick up ideas and apply them. Definitely, and I've always been a magpie. If I see a good idea and I think it can work, I will take it. But we do have to make sure of what we're seeing are what's going on in that particular area and look at it closely before we make the right decisions. Because I think Wayne said it earlier, that there's nothing more unsuccessful as the wrong decision. It's almost better not to intervene sometimes than to get it wrong and have to unpick it.
Great, thank you, Patricia. I am going to try and squeeze in so very quick answers. As a bit of a difficult question, but what would you like to see change on your local high street or town centre? If there was one change you'd like to see post-pandemic, Sherry.
An easy permitting scheme that would allow temporary events to happen, that would make it very easy for non-professional groups to be able to access the space.
Thank you, Sherry. Wayne.
I'd like to think that York are doing the right thing from 2023. They are what they call prioritising the human experience by being the first city to totally ban cars. And it's brave and it's experimental. And it's about time that somewhere as large as that started to think about what that can create in terms of what's just been said about events and people in the streets. but also about what that means for the environment and what that means for well-being. So I think but there is still, I would say, the vast majority actually of towns and the people who make decisions in towns think that would be totally destructive to the economy of the town centre. And until it's done and tried properly and given space to breathe as a concept, then we'll never change that narrative. Narrative that says that towns can be dominated by cars and people come.
Great, thanks, Wayne. Patricia.
I've written down, as soon as you said the question, I've written down pedestrianisation. I completely concur. To put people first. We did an event this summer, another event, and in partnership with the local theatre, with the Lyric Hammersmith. And the only brief I gave them was, we want dancing in the street. We want people to come back out. We know they want to come out. We want dancing in the street. And that's what we had. We had a band on the town square, and we had people dancing in the street. And if they could have danced up King Street as well, they couldn't do, they could on the pavement, but they couldn't dance in the road itself because we couldn't pedestrianise it. Because as Sherry's just said, we'd have had to go through so many hoops and so many permissions just to get the street closed, and so we could dance in it. They're never going to do it, so we didn't. And but yeah, less permissions, more dancing in the street. I think and less cars. Put the people first.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Patricia. I'm definitely running over because I was supposed to hand over to Catherine, but really interesting conversation, guys. Thank you very much to our speakers and for all of you for joining. It's obviously a huge topic, multifaceted. There's a lot of things we didn't get to, but hopefully some of that will be explored at the rest of the Real Estate Live. Do pop over to nla.london because we've also continued some of these conversations. I'm going to hand back over to Catherine.
Great. Thank you, Benjamin. Thanks to all of our panelists. Fascinating. We could have gone on and on, couldn't we? But that's really great. But as Benjamin says, there's lots of other discussion forums taking place on this subject. And you will be able to watch this back on Real Estate Live and glean some more info. So thanks to everybody for taking part and to watching. Just going to share with you what's coming up now for the rest of today. Lots more things happening. We're next going to a session on making Outer London's industrial and logistical parks in more sustainable. We're then heading up to Belfast, up and across probably to Belfast. And then we're looking at the role of music in regeneration and how that can support vibrant communities. So lots more discussions to be had today and of course tomorrow. But for now, thanks very much to all of you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at a session in the near future. Thanks again and goodbye.